sister Joan traveled to Malaysia in 1968 on their way to India and ended up staying and meeting their respective future spouses. We've been talking quite delightfully to Hosan, her husband, tonight while we were waiting to get ready, and we've enjoyed meeting him as well. She and her husband pioneered to various places, including New Guinea, where she served on the National Spiritual Assembly at one point as its secretary, and she has just done quite a few different things for the faith in her many years of service, and we're really delighted to have her tonight to give us a presentation about Mother Dunn, whom she remembers, I would say fondly, I'm sure, and I suppose quite well from her childhood. And so we will now turn the stage over to Mariette, and we will hear her presentation.
Thank you, Robert. We'll just get the first slide up here.
Hold on a second. I'm going to change it over to you. Just I want to make sure I get the right one. And hopefully I got the right one now.
I get the show my screen come up again.
Yeah. Perfect. Yep.
Do I press that?
Yes, please.
Okay. There we go.
Great.
Okay.
And then Hosan, you can just put it into presentation mode so we can see the slides nice and big. That'd be great.
Yeah.
How do we put it into presentation mode? Mine. No.
Over under slideshow at the top there.
Yeah, slideshow, just this one here.
Oh, slideshow here. Here.
Yeah, just one moment. Oh,
Honey.
oh.
Yep, you're good. There you go.
Okay.
Is that in slideshow? Yeah?
Hit from the beginning. From the beginning icon there on the left. Top left.
Oh yes, from the beginning.
Okay. All right.
Oh.
Oh.
It's okay. Just say okay there. We
Okay.
saw that.
All right.
Oh, okay.
Great. You're good to go. Big smile. You're awesome.
I don't have my. Okay. I don't have the little slides on the left of my screen now.
That's okay. That's okay.
Which I kind of rely on a little bit. Anyway, we'll go with this. Okay, let's see. So, Hand of the Claws, Clara, Mary Dunn, and John Henry Hyde Dunn, and the Tablets of the Divine Plan. Now, I can't talk about Mother Dunn without talking about John Henry Hyde Dunn, because it was both of them that pioneered to Australia. So I will do a little about John. Well, he was called Hyde, actually, Hyde Dunn, and then I will go on to Mother, to Clara Dunn. This is another photograph of both of them before they came to Australia. Another photograph of them. You know, Baha'u'llah appointed 4 hands of the cause, Abdu'l-Baha appointed 4, and Shoghi Effendi appointed 42, which gave in total 50 hands of the cause. And Shoghi Effendi started appointing the hands of the cause in 51, then again 52, and then subsequently as the years went by, and the last contingent was appointed in 1957. The hands of the cause Baha'u'llah talks about and gives them their station. And he says, the obligation of the hands of the cause of God are to diffuse the divine fragrances, to edify the souls of men, to promote learning, to improve the character of all men, and to be at all times and under all conditions sanctified and detached from earthly things. They must manifest the fear of God by their conduct, their manners, their deeds, and their words. So it was a tall order that the hands were given. And of course, many of them didn't feel, especially when they were initially appointed, that they could measure up to all of those things that Baha'u'llah had said about them. You know, there's one story, I don't know whether you've heard it, that one of the hands said, I'm not worthy. And Shoghi Effendi said to him, make yourself worthy. So it didn't come easily to them. They struggled and they had to learn to be detached and to diffuse the divine fragrances and so on that Baha'u'llah had instilled into them. I'm going to first start about John Henry Hyde Dunn. He was born in England in 1855. He was the son of a consulting chemist. And as a child, he sat on the knee of Charles Dickens. So many of you may know of the author Charles Dickens. So that kind of suggests to us that maybe he was raised in a medium, well-to-do family. His father was Arthur Dunn and mother was Louise Hyde. And I'm guessing that's where he got his name Hyde. And he was the 12th child. So large families in those days. He became a salesman in England and in France before immigrating to the United States with his wife Fanny. And whilst a travelling salesman in Seattle, he heard of the faith from another salesman called Colonel Ward Fitzgerald, and he became a Baha'i. It was in 1912 that Hyde met Abdu'l-Baha in San Francisco. And it was in 1916 that Hyde's wife Fanny passed away. They had no children. We don't really have any more information about Hyde's early life. The only information we have is from the time that he met Clara Dunn, and that's what I'll be talking about. So we're now going to move on to Clara Dunn. He was born in England in 1869, and her father's name was Thomas Holder. He was a farmer, a soldier in the Crimean War, and a London policeman at the time that Clara was born. Her mother's name was Maria Holder, née McHugh of Ireland. So she was from Irish background, but she was born in London. The Holder children were Harry, Kate, Walter, Annie, Emily. The sixth child was Clara. Then there was Frederick and Albert, who died in infancy. So coming from another large family. The family immigrated to Canada in 1870, when Clara was just 1 year old. And her father worked in the railway workshop in Allendale. Clara's childhood was marked by poverty and domestic tension. Her father was a Methodist and her mother an Irish Catholic. So there was obviously religious arguing that went on. Clara was married in 1885 to William Allen Davis in Ontario, Canada. But shortly after they were married, she gave birth to a baby boy, and then her husband was killed in a railway accident and left Clara to look after the baby by herself. In 1902, at the age of 33, Clara left Canada and moved to the United States, and she took up nursing. Her brother took care of her son, Alan. And it's interesting that her son, Alan, passed away in 1957, 3 years before Clara did. However, he came to Australia and he met her once with his wife, Louise. And after his passing, Louise actually took care of Clara for a little while, because at that time she was already 87, 88. And she helped to care for Clara at that time. So Clara face a new light that I didn't know in any other human being. So this is what attracted her to Hyde initially. And then, of course, she went to a series of firesides and she became a Baha'i. A little while after she became a Baha'i, she started having firesides, and she then became ill and she virtually had a nervous breakdown. And people close to her were saying, Clara's gone cuckoo. She's gone out of her mind. She talks about this silly religion and she's gone stupid. And this really saddened her. And she took some time to get over that. And then in 1912, she was encouraged to go to San Francisco and meet Abdu'l-Baha. But she didn't have any money to go. And so she thought, well, where am I going to borrow some money that I can afford to go to San Francisco? Because at this time she was living in Seattle, in Washington. So Clara had met a Baha'i woman whose father was Mr. Bailey, who was the mayor of a small town. And his daughter had become a Baha'i. And she had asked Clara if she would invite Mr. Bailey to her firesides to see if she could attract him to the faith so that he also could become a Baha'i. So it was during this time that she was encouraged to go to San Francisco. And she thought, well, what am I going to do? Maybe Mr. Bailey could help me. But you know what had happened? She was a bit embarrassed to go to Mr. Bailey because the last time he'd come to her fireside, he'd proposed to her. And she was very embarrassed and she said, Mr. Bailey, I could never marry you. And here she was asking him if he could loan her some money. So she picks up enough courage and she goes to the house and she knocks on the door. And the lady, the carer, comes to the door. And Clara says, I would like to see Mr. Bailey. And the lady says, well, I'm not going to let you in. Oh dear, what happened? Sorry. Accidentally. I'm not going to let you in. And Clara said, you know, there was nothing that was going to stop me from seeing Mr. Bailey at that point. So she pushed open the door and she said, tell me, where is his room? So the lady, all right. So up the stairs she went and she knocked on the door and she went in. And Mr. Bailey had had a headache and he was sitting on his bed. And she said to him, Mr. Bailey, I've come to ask you for a loan because I would like to visit Abdu'l-Baha in San Francisco. And he started to laugh. And she said, Mr. Bailey, this is no laughing matter. And he said, you know, this morning my daughter comes in here asking me for some money to go to see Mr. Bailey, Abdu'l-Baha in San Francisco. And I think she's gone mad. And now here comes the woman that I love and tells me she wants some money to go and visit Abdu'l-Baha too. So she said, he just filled in the check and handed it to me. Didn't say anything else. So Clara makes her way to visit Abdu'l-Baha. She arrives at the house. It was a long train ride. She'd hardly eaten. She was tired. She rings the bell and no one answers. She was absolutely feeling miserable and she began to cry. She knocks on the door and nobody answers. And she started to get mad, thinking she'd travelled thousands of miles to see Abdu'l-Baha and I know that they're in there and they won't open the door. So she rang and she rang. And then finally she tried the door. It was unlocked. She pushed the door open and she walked in. She was ushered into Abdu'l-Baha's presence. And he was with Ali Akbar, the interpreter. He said, would you excuse me for not rising? She said, I know it was Abdu'l-Baha's voice. For many times he spoke in English and didn't speak through the interpreter. I'm very weary. Oh, she said, that struck my heart. And then I looked up, this is what Clara says, I looked up at Ali Akbar and I said, if Abdu'l-Baha is weary, would he excuse me? Yes, yes, he smiled and bowed his head. So she left the room. Then in half an hour's time, Abdu'l-Baha invites Clara to dine with him. She said, amazingly, he appeared restored and like 7 feet tall. Clara said, oh, his smile was so beautiful. He was so radiant and glorious looking. At the dinner table, Abdu'l-Baha told a story about an old lady who took a duck to the market, proclaiming her duck to be exceptionally large and wonderful. He told the story and he looked at Clara all the while. She realised that he was teaching her a lesson. And she thought, well, when I tell a story, I guess I exaggerate. If God will forgive me, I'll never do it again. After that dinner, Mariette Dunn, who was also there, approached Clara and said to her, I'm so sorry. I was supposed to be on door duty and I was the one who didn't open the door for you. She was mad with him. This is a photograph of the early Baha'is in San Francisco with Abdu'l-Baha. You know, although the amount of time that Hyde and Clara spent with Abdu'l-Baha was very brief, the impact of his presence and radiant smile remained vivid memories, which they continued to share with others for the rest of their lives. After Abdu'l-Baha left San Francisco, both Clara and Hyde carried out their activities as Baha'is with new dedication and energy. So that was 1912. 1916, Hyde's wife Fanny passed away. And then we don't have any story, but obviously Hyde and Clara got to know one another. And 16 months later, they were married in San Jose, California, on the 9th of July. Hyde was 62 and Clara was 48. In 1916, Abdu'l-Baha revealed the tablets of the Divine Plan. But you know, they were not available to the Friends until 1919, when they were read at the New York National Convention, which was later designated the City of the Covenant. And so it was in 1919 that Hyde and Clara were on holiday in Santa Cruz, California, when they received the tablets of the Divine Plan. And I've quoted this. This is what Hyde said at the time. It was very simple, a wave that came into our lives, possessing us and satisfying every desire to serve our beloved cause, the cause of Baha'u'llah and his glorious covenant. Mother was reading Abdu'l-Baha's call to the United States and Canada, and his appeal was so penetrating and thrilling, it pierced our hearts. In one part he said, if I could only go in poverty and barefooted and raise the call of Ya Baha Labha, but that is not now possible. Mother looked up and said, shall we go? Yes, was Hyde's reply. And no further discussion took place. We returned to San Francisco, and after a few months, my resignation to my firm was sent, everything given up, and arrangements made for our prompt sailing. They wrote to Abdu'l-Baha for his advice, to see if he was happy that they would go to Australia. And he cabled back. And he said, highly commendable. So off they went on the RMS Simona. They arrived in Sydney on the 10th of April 1920. At this time, Hyde was 65 and Clara 51. They had very little money and had to find work. You know, in Hawaii on the way, Hyde had purchased some brooches with butterflies in them. Maybe he thought that he could sell them when he got to Australia. He didn't declare them because he didn't know he had to. And it seems that immigration department in Australia was as tough then, back in 1920, as they are now today. The immigration department sent him to court, and he hoped that the judge would send him to prison so that he'd know what Abdu'l-Baha went through. But instead, the judge took the last of their money. He fined them, and they had very little money, and he took the last that they had. So those first few years were very, very difficult. At their age, Hyde done 65, ready to retire, but now he was the breadwinner. They found a flat apartment in Sydney, and very unfortunately, Hyde took sick. And so it was left to Clara to find work. Luckily, she was a nurse and she was able to get work in a doctor's clinic. It took Hyde about 6 months to recover and gain strength from his illness. And he eventually obtained a sales position with a company called Bacchus Marsh Milk Company. Soon after, they were bought over by Nestle, which is still running today. And I'm sure that you have Nestle in many parts of the world, as we still do here in Australia. After 2.5 years with Nestle, he became the national sales manager. And as such, he travelled the whole of Australia, Tasmania, and New Zealand. Baha'u'llah obviously planned that salesman job for him, because he then could travel the whole of Australia and spread the teachings of the faith. This is the Bacchus Marsh Milk Company in those days. Clara would travel, of course, with Hyde from place to place. She would set up home, and while he was away during the week, touring various towns, she would make friends and entertain and teach the faith. She would arrange meetings so that on weekends, Hyde could conduct firesides during the weekends. They never refused help to anyone. All their spare money went in helping others, trying to save men from alcohol, bailing people out of prison, giving clothes to the poor, and providing food and housing when necessary, calling on sick people and praying for them, consoling the bereaved people who'd lost a dear one, and many other acts of charity and kindness. This is how they taught the faith of Baha'u'llah. Clara possessed a magnetic personality, dressed almost regally, and reflected a wonderful light and sweetness of Holy Spirit. She attracted people to Baha'i meetings. Hyde attracted people through the sweetness of his smile and his kind and gentle manner. He always had a good answer for the seekers' questions. They were a perfect teaching team. when somebody asked the beloved guardian what was the best method of teaching the faith, Shoghi Effendi said, follow the example of the Dunns. So Hyde was visiting Lismore, which is a small country town on the north of New South Wales, up by the Queensland border. He was on a sales trip up there, travelling to all those different areas. And he was staying in the pub, which he did in a lot of places that he went to, because it was the pub in those days that provided the accommodation. And a lot of travelling salesmen would stay at the local hotel. And they were meeting with a group of buddies one night. And Hyde Dunn was talking about the Baha'i principles. And they, of course, became very sceptical, as first listeners are. And they suggested that Hyde should talk to another visiting salesman there. His name was Mr. Whittaker. Oswald Whittaker was an optometrist. And so he was there just like Hyde Dunn was there, selling his wares. And Oswald asked him a question. Can you tell me what is love? If somebody asked you the question, what is love, what would your answer be? I know what my father would say. Jokingly, he told us, love is an itchy feeling you can't scratch. But Hyde Dunn had a more serious answer. He said, whole law and power of the great universe is formulated love in action. Well, that certainly made Oswald think. And that was the beginning of his search. A few days later, he became a Baha'i. So he was the first Baha'i in Australia. This is where he's buried, in Sydney. You know, sometime after the Dunn's arrival in Australia, Clara received a letter from a believer who addressed her as Dear Mother. And when she read the letter, she recalled a dream in which she learned that she would someday be called Mother by many people. She wrote back saying she and Hyde were pleased to be called Father and Mother, but she also asked the beloved guardian whether the believers should refer to them in this way. And the guardian wrote back saying, yes, you are as their parents. So it was from this time onwards that they dropped their name, Clara and Hyde, and in the Baha'i community, they were very lovingly called Mother and the Father Dunn. The first local spiritual assembly was formed in Melbourne, in Victoria, in 1923, followed by Adelaide and then Sydney. Adelaide in South Australia and Sydney in New South Wales, for those of you who are not familiar with the map of Australia. And the next bit of statistic is very interesting. By July 1923, Hyde Dunn had visited 225 towns in Australia, an average of one new town for each 4.5 days of work. Now, when you look at the map of Australia, Australia is big. Travelling from one town to another was not always a small journey. And then in those days, bus train, horse and cart, very difficult. But this was the pace that Dunn displayed in those first few years when he was in Australia, at his age. Shoghi Effendi writes, "What an encouragement and what an inspiration to be revived every now and then with a fresh breeze wafting from faraway Australia and laden with the perfume of your love and devotion for his sacred cause. 1,000 times well done, my dearly beloved ones. Your warmth, your perseverance, your confidence, your faith will, I'm certain, establish our precious cause in the very heart of that continent, which in future will ring with the greatest name and extol the glorious self-sacrificing labours of you who are the pioneers of his cause in those faraway regions. Your reward will be unexpediently great, and your efforts will be richly recompensed by Abdu'l-Baha himself in the world to come. Your true brother, Shoghi." So this is what spurred them on, receiving these letters of encouragement from Shoghi Effendi. Hyde would send his report regularly to update Shoghi Effendi on the progress of the faith. And of course, Shoghi Effendi would reply with these wonderful, encouraging words. Baha'u'llah watched over our beloved Australian pioneers and assisted them at all times. Spiritually, they were always happy. They were sad. It was because they thought they had failed in some of their sacred tasks entrusted to them. Mother Dunn, I'm going to call her Mother from now on. Mother Dunn made a pilgrimage in 1932. Father could not go. He was the breadwinner at 77. They couldn't afford for Father to go, and he couldn't afford to be away from work. Years later, this is a quote from a Baha'i friend who wrote about Mother. Years later, Mother told us that she really went to ask Shoghi Effendi to replace them as they felt they had failed. This was in 1932. They still only had 3 local spiritual assemblies. They were finding it very difficult in teaching the faith to get converts. And she said she was sitting with Shoghi Effendi. With tears in her eyes, she begged him to replace them with someone else. She said to the guardian, "I feel so awkward and clumsy, uneducated. I feel that somebody else could do it better than me." The beloved guardian looked at her, put his hand lovingly over hers. Looking deep into her eyes, he said, "Go back to Australia and form the National Spiritual Assembly. Remember Peter the fisherman? He could neither read nor write and did not even know the days of the week. So Mother returned from pilgrimage and with new courage and spirit And it was not long after, in accordance with the Guardian's instructions, the National Spiritual Assembly of Australia and New Zealand was formed. Father Dunn was inspired by the beloved Guardian's instructions, and he continued his teaching work with great vigour. So, not easy for them. This is just an early photograph of the Dunns with friends. They are sitting in the front on the right-hand side. This is a meeting place where they held firesides. This is another photograph. And this lady, Emily Easy, became a Baha'i in 1925. She was one of the early Baha'is. This is a family photograph of the Dunns with Stanley and Mariette Bolton and their 3 children, who were Americans who came to Australia. He was a chiropractor, and they heard of the faith from the Dunns. And they subsequently purchased a property outside of Sydney as their holiday retreat. And when they passed away, it was given over as a Baha'i property. And during their lifetime also, from 1938 onwards, that's where the summer schools, the Yerrimbul summer schools were held at that time, at their property. So their contribution to the faith in Australia has been huge. The first National Spiritual Assembly of Australia and New Zealand was formed in 1934. There were only about 70 Baha'is in the whole of Australia at that time, with 3 local assemblies, one in Sydney, one in Adelaide, and one in Auckland. The one in Melbourne had lapsed. And so there was a lot of teaching work still that had to be done. This is a photograph of the first National Spiritual Assembly. Hyde Dunn is there, centred in the middle. First Hazaratul Quds was made available 21st May 1944 at 2 Lane Road, Paddington, Sydney. And this became, of course, the hub of all community activities. Hyde Dunn passed away on the 17th of February 1941 at the age of 86. He was appointed a Hand of the Cause posthumously by the beloved Guardian in 1952. And shortly after the funeral of Hyde Dunn, the Guardian praised Clara's courage, saying that he was pleased she had accepted Hyde's passing in such a noble and exemplary Baha'i spirit. Now, Shoghi Effendi sent a message regarding Hyde Dunn. The community of the most great name in these far-off islands have lost a great leader, a stalwart upholder of the New World Order of Baha'u'llah. The influence he's exercised will, however, continue to live, and the example he has set will inspire the rising generation to perform deeds as great and brilliant as those which will ever remain associated with his name. Our dear friend, Mr. Hyde Dunn, will, from his exalted station, intercede on your behalf, and you should, on your part, strive to emulate one whom Baha'i historians will recognise and acclaim as Australia's spiritual conqueror. I will pray for his dear spiritual children from the depths of my heart. Mother was now on her own. My parents became Baha'is in December of 1944. Mother visited us in early 1945. So my parents did not meet Father Dunn. It's only Mother who became very dear to us. She made many visits and spent a lot of time with our family, initially deepening my mother and father, holding firesides for the community. And then in 1952, the beloved guardian appointed her hand of the cause. This is a photograph of Mother in the community where my parents helped to establish a local spiritual assembly, the local spiritual assembly of Woodville. And this is Mother addressing the gathering. It was a public meeting held in the Woodville Town Hall, to which the mayor and many dignitaries were invited. It was a big thing in those days. And you know, Mother wasn't used to speaking in public. It was always Hyde Dunn who did that. And it was only after her passing that she learnt that she too had to step up. And she did it with great dignity. Here we are with the Dunns growing up, the family. That's my mother and father on the left with my two of my sisters there, or three of my sisters. That was before I came along. Then here we are. I'm sitting on Mother's lap there. This is such a cute photo. This is taken, I'm the little one. We were playing dress-ups, and there's Mother Dunn. She's looking at me at that particular time. That was taken in our front garden. Here she is when my brother came along. There she is in our home, giving my brother the bottle. I remember that occasion. I was about 8 years of age at that time, and my mother was cooking dinner, and the baby needed to be fed. And so my mum asked, Mother, would you like to feed the baby? Of course, she adored to feed him. So that was in 1954, when he was just a baby. This is a photograph at the Yerrimble Summer School, which I told you that the Boltons were instrumental in establishing. And there we are with Mother, and I'm the little girl in the front. My three sisters are behind Mother there. And on the left of the photograph, or the right of Mother, some of you may recognise the former House of Justice member, Dr. Peter Khan. This, of course, was taken when he was a young man. We knew the Khan family very well, and Peter came to our house many times. In fact, he had his 21st birthday party in our house. I wanted to share with you, you know, as time went by, my father became a National Spiritual Assembly member. And when that happened, he would travel from Adelaide into Sydney for NSA meetings. At that time, Mother was staying at the Hazaradal Courts, because there was a flat on the side, which was her little flat. And so every time my father went for NSA meeting, he would see Mother. And she would often send us gifts. And I received many gifts from her. and I would send back many gifts. She loved black jelly beans. Do you know what black jelly beans are? And I used to go to the corner shop and gather all the black jelly beans and put them in a little bag, wrap them up with a little bow, and I would ask my father to give them to her. I would buy her favourite toilet soap, and I've got some here. It's called Cashmere Bouquet Soap. Don't know whether you can see it. This is a packet. You can still buy it today. It's not so popular, but it was very popular then, and it was her favourite. So I used to buy her the Cashmere Bouquet Soap, and that was the little gift. I would buy these things out of my pocket money. And so Mother would lovingly send us gifts back. One time she sent me a handkerchief, and here's the handkerchief that I've kept all these years. Another time she gave me a shawl. This was a red and green shawl that she always knitted, and she handed them out for the friends. She knitted this one and she gave this one to me, and they were always red and green. And she would always ask the friends, you know why I knitted it red and green? Can you guess? Green for the station of the Barb, for his lineage, and red for martyrdom. One time she gave me her Baha'i ring, which was very precious. You know, little things that we would observe of Mother. She would love to have an eggnog drink. You know what an eggnog drink is? Fresh orange juice. And she would break an egg and let the yolk fall in. And then she would drink it straight down, and the yolk would just go down. And as little kids, we would watch her do this, and we would laugh and wonder, how can she swallow the egg yolk like that in orange juice? You remember at the beginning of the story I told you that her mother was from Ireland. Well, Mother had an Irish wit about her too. You know, there's one story that my father tells, that one time he arrived at the Hazard Quds in Sydney for his NSA meeting, and he rang the door bell. She answered the door, and she said to him, well, aren't you going to give me a kiss? Come in, aren't you going to give me a kiss? And then my father said to her, teasing her, Mother, you know that Shoghi Effendi said that the men are not allowed to kiss the women. And she looked at him and she said, he didn't say anything about grandmothers. So that was a big joke that they had. When we were driving with Mother in the car, and my father was very obedient, he would go the speed limit. But she would always say to him, go faster, go faster. And while we were driving, she would sing her Irish ditties. Obviously, her mother had taught her all these different Irish ditties. One of the things that she always said was, do you know what improves with age? Nothing else improves, but this one does. She says everything else breaks down, but something improves with age. Can you guess? It's your forgettery. So that was another little joke that she would share with the friends. You know, in 1953, the beloved Guardian called for a series of intercontinental conferences. At that time, my father was on the National Spiritual Assembly in Australia, and they visited New Delhi to attend that conference. Mother Dunn went too. She was already at the age of 84, but she went. And I remember my mother buying clothes for Mother Dunn. In fact, Mother Dunn was staying with us at one time, and my mother went into the city, into one of the department stores, and brought back a whole suitcase of clothes that she'd bought on credit. And she brought them back and got Mother to try them on. And the ones that she liked, she kept. And the ones that she didn't like, then she was able to take them back and get her money back. So that's how many of the Baha'i friends looked after Mother. They helped to, Mother didn't have anything. She was supported by the Baha'i friends wherever she went. She stayed with them. They fed her, they dressed her, they paid for her travel. They accompanied her. They adored her. And she likewise adored all the friends in the community. It was her nature. She was loving. When my parents went to this Intercontinental Conference, they subsequently went on pilgrimage and had the pleasure of meeting Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith. And it was while they were away that the family, the girls at the time, we all had to go and stay with our relatives. I went to stay with my auntie. In 1953, I get a letter addressed to me. I'm just 7 years of age, and Mother takes the care to write to me. And this is what she says. To my dear little Princess Mariette, with all my love, you must be a real princess for Abdul Baha and the beloved guardian. Show all the other children how kind and loving you can be, and of all things, do all you can for Mummy and Daddy, who loves you so much and has done so much for you while they are away in India. Make them proud to hear all the kind things you have done for your auntie and uncle. With my dear love to you, lovingly, Mother Dunn. And this is her letter in her writing to me. Another letter was written to my elder sister in 1955. This is my sister Kay, who's 7 years older than me. So she was a teenager at this time. And she likewise was sending little gifts to Mother, like we all did. And Mother writes to her from Tulang Road, Paddington, the Hazarad Quds, on March the 5th, 1955. My sister said to me one day, Mariette, did you ever get that box of chocolates from Mother? I said, oh, I can't remember. It's so long ago. I really can't remember. She said, well, this is what happened to the chocolates. Dear little Kay, this is my sister, and I don't think you are so very little. Thank you for your very sweet intercalary letter. It was very kind of you to write me such a nice letter. Tell Mariette I had a nice box of chocolates and a handkerchief to send her by Daddy when he came for the NSA meeting. But he came daring down the stairs at Tulang Road, Paddington, because he thought he would miss his plane to go to the airport, that he put everything out of my head. And now I will enclose the hanky, but the chocolates, I'm afraid, listen to this one, I ate them myself. That's Mother's wit for you. That's what happened to my chocolates. This is Mother Dunn with my mother on her right and Ethel Dorr on her left. This was when they were preparing to go to New Delhi for the Intercontinental Conference. And there they are. Ethel Dorr, this lady, she was like the companion for Mother to go to that conference. Here's a few of the early photographs. Mother Dunn with some of the Baha'i friends at that time. And there's my mother with my little brother there in the front, and Mother next to her. This is another one taken at Hazrat al-Quds, and there's some other friends with her. You know, in 1954, Shoghi Effendi calls for a new institution of auxiliary boards. We didn't have auxiliary board members before then. This was at the beginning of the 10-year crusade, where Shoghi Effendi was eager to expand the Baha'i world. The beginning of the crusade, we only had 12 national spiritual assemblies, and we had to grow them. And the hands of the cause that were already appointed in 1951 and 52 were now to appoint auxiliary board members to assist them with their role of propagation and proclamation. So the two board members that Mother appointed were my father and this beautiful lady, Thelma Perks. You know, at the end of the New Crusade, the National Spiritual Assemblies had grown from 12 to 56. And it was due to a huge degree to the teaching work of the Hands of the Cause and the auxiliary board members at that time, opening up new areas, encouraging the formation of local spiritual assemblies, and then encouraging the formation of national spiritual assemblies to bring those national spiritual assemblies up to 56. Of course, as you know, in 1957, the last contingent of hands were appointed, and it was at that time that my father was appointed. There was also an Intercontinental Conference held in Sydney in 1958. Mother Dunn is there, together with 4 other hands of the cause. Hand of the cause, Agnes Alexander, you will see her sitting there, kind of in the middle. My father, Mason Remy, who was at that time the representative of the Guardian, because you know, the Guardian had passed away in 1957, but he already planned ahead. He had already planned who were to represent him at these various intercontinental conferences. And that's how Hand of the Cause Mason Remy was the Guardian's representative at that Intercontinental Conference in Sydney. So he's there with Agnes Alexander, Mother Dunn, and then Mr. Kardem. They were the 5 hands at that time. And it was during this conference that the foundation stone of the temple, house of worship here in Sydney, was laid. And it was the request of the beloved Guardian that Mother place sacred earth from the most holy shrine and plaster from the castle of Marcoux in the foundation of the house of worship. So this is a photograph of her. You know, I was thinking what did the Dunns do anything differently to what is done today? And today the House of Justice calls upon us to develop the 4 core activities, the devotionals, the Rui Institute courses, the children's classes and the junior youth classes. Plus, of course, the intensive programs of growth which we have. What did Mother and Father Dunn do differently? Did they do anything differently? They taught with love and love and more love. The believers loved them. They had devotionals. They had home visits, followed up by letters and more letters, because that was the way of communication in those days. You know, telephones, computers, non-existent. Letters even to children, as the example of ones to myself and my sister. Firesides, how many hundreds of firesides they must have had. Deepening gatherings, public meetings, all of these things the Dunns did. It's no wonder that when asked, Shoghi Effendi said to the believers, follow the example of the Dunns. And that's exactly what we're called upon to do today. Here's a beautiful photograph of Mother in prayer. She knew quite a few prayers off by heart, and she had her favourites. John Henry Hyde Dunn and Clara Dunn, husband and wife, both hands of the cause of God, pioneers to the continent of Australia, now rest side by side at the Warrenorma Cemetery, Sutherland, in Sydney. It's about half an hour's drive from the city. You can go to this beautiful resting place. You know, there's a beautiful quote on the gravestone which says, "Whoso hath attained their presence will glory in their meeting, and all that dwell in every land will be illumined by their memory." And how true that is. How true that is when we remember all of the hands of the cause and the huge task that was laid before them and the huge sacrifice that they all made. Friends, that finishes my, whoops, this one went funny. I don't know why I did that. That finishes my, no, I'll go back there. That finishes my talk on Mother Dunn. You know, there's so many stories that I have. I'd be here a lifetime. But I tried to think of the most relevant to give you an overview. And of course, there's no way that you can leave Father Dunn out of the story. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mariette. I was laughing and almost crying a few times. And you brought tears to our eyes for many, many marvelous of the stories of their incredible sacrifice, their devotion, their love. I don't even know if I can list all of the incredible qualities that you've described and exemplified in their lives. And this is a kind of presentation that I think we will all remember for a very long time. All of it. And we are I can speak one else, all of us. So this loops into the lives of the Dunns. I do have a question for you.
Yes.
I almost hesitate to ask this. So when you went to New Guinea as a pioneer,
Yes.
and you had a whole of in the background, how did you do it? What did you do? I mean, how you must have felt overwhelmed by the obligations and responsibilities
Of pioneering in Papua New Guinea? Is that what
I mean, I mean, how did you in your life try to figure out how you were going to do this? Dare I ask?
Trial and error, Robert. None of us are perfect, and we come into the Baha'i faith, and we love Baha'u'llah, and we serve Baha'u'llah to the best of our ability. And it's just day by day, you know, you do what you do. I mean, of course, I had all these wonderful childhood memories, and my sisters also pioneered. You know, we left home at 18. We were already gone. And, well, it wasn't until 23, I was 23, that I went to Malaysia and I met my husband. And then a few years later, we went to Papua New Guinea. But I don't know. You just do it, Robert. It's like the services that you give to the faith. Why do you do it? It's like anybody. We went to Papua New Guinea. There was the goal of the plan at that time for Australia to send pioneers to Papua New Guinea, and Hassan was very lucky in obtaining work there, and we just went. We didn't know what to expect. I had no clue what to expect when I arrived. And, you know, it was something really beautiful happened the day that we arrived in Leh, where we were posted, where Hassan got work. To meet us at the airport, can you believe it, was my father. And the Knight of Baha'u'llah, Violet Hernke. And the reason, I hadn't seen my father for about 18 months. And there he was, meeting us at the airport when we arrived, because it was just after National Convention time. It was in May. And he had been there to attend their National Spiritual Assembly meeting, the convention. And so when he heard that that's when we were arriving, he planned to be in Leh and was at the airport when we arrived. I didn't know that he would be there. We were absolutely shocked to see him there. He and Violet Hernke. And you know, the university where my husband obtained employment, they had sent their representative to the airport to meet us. He couldn't understand how come my father was there with this lady to welcome us. So he thought, how do you know these people? So we had to play it down. We didn't want to say too much because we had gone there to pioneer. Hassan had gotten this job. And at that point, it wasn't timely to tell them that we were Baha'is. We had to tread very carefully. So it was really interesting. That was an interesting experience for me.
You've shared a lot of stories about the Dunns in Australia, and I'm wondering if you have any stories at all or information about their visits to New Zealand, because I know they went to New Zealand very early, and and were of course helped establish the first local assembly in Auckland. And I'm sure there'll be some New Zealand friends here who will ask that question, even though they haven't yet.
Yeah, I don't have any, you know, like personal stories of their visits there. I know they went many times to New Zealand to help to deepen the friends there. But yeah, I don't particularly have any personal stories of that time.
And the stories that you had about the Dunns meeting Apple Baha, you had mentioned that you had a recording of Mother Dunn telling the story. So I thought I'd ask you where you got the stories. I assume you got them more or less from her, or in some cases maybe from Graham Hassell's article, the research he did.
Now, Graham Hassell got the information from, I'll tell you where. It was in 1950. I think it was in, oh, I can't remember the year. 54? Was it 54? Mother was, yes, I think it was around 54, late 54, that Mother was visiting with us. And my father wanted to do a recording of how she became a Baha'i and how she met Abdu'l-Baha. So in those days, it was done on tape recorder, you know, the old-fashioned tape recorder. And I remember them doing it. I was about 7, I would have been 8 years of age. That would be about right. Because I remember going up into the lounge room. They were up there for a long time and Mother was telling this story and I kept on walking in and out. And every time I walked in and out, the door squeaked. So on the original tape, you can actually hear our front door squeaking every time I went in to disturb them. But my father then was asking, because Mother was already 84 at that time, 84, 85. And my father knew that if he was going to get any story from Mother, he had to get it very soon, because otherwise her forgettery was improving. And yes, it wouldn't be easy. So the opportunity came and he taped her. And so many of those stories are taken from that tape. That tape went off to the House of Justice. They have that tape.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where
we have a question now. Whether someone wanted to know. Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That's where he got it. God bless your father for that effort, among many, as we've heard. We have a question here. Someone wanted to know whether you ever met Philip Marangella, who was pioneering in East Asia.
I didn't, but my father did.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But I personally don't know anything about him. I know the name. You know, one thing I can tell you too is an interesting story, is that when we were growing up and from like 54, 55, 56, quite a few of the Hands of the Cause visited us in Australia. And many of them came to our home. And some of them stayed with us. I remember Bill Sears staying with us for some time. I remember Hand of the Cause, Dr. Mahaja staying with us. I remember dear Rahir Khanum, wife of the beloved guardian, coming for dinner one night. And that would have been in 1958 when she visited Australia. My mother cooked up a storm that night. She cooked up her best cooking. She got out their wedding dinner set, all the good cutlery and the best tablecloth, and we girls had to dress up, you know, all prim and proper and our best manners because Rahir Khanum was coming for dinner. So I remember that. We also had dear Enoch Olinga stay with us. And that would have been 58 also. And dear Enoch, you know, he had such a beautiful smile and such a huge laugh. When he laughed, you also laughed because you laughed at his laugh. I was 12 years of age at the time when around 11, 12. And I had these silly jokes, you know, the chicken jokes and the elephant jokes that you learn at school. Why did the chicken cross the road? You know, these silly jokes. I would ask Enoch at the dinner table if he knew why did the chicken cross the road. And, you know, he's coming from an African background. He didn't know these silly Western jokes. And then when I told him the answer to get to the other side, he would just crack up with laughter. I remember asking him elephant jokes until his sides were splitting. One night he had to leave the table. He was laughing so much that he couldn't sit at the dinner table anymore. He had to excuse himself. And we laughed because he laughed. And for every year, you know, the Hands of the Cause met in Haifa every year until 1963 at the conclave of the Hands of the Cause. And when my father and Enoch met each other each year, Enoch would always, with outstretched arms, embrace my father and say, why? And then they would laugh together. And that referred to why did the chicken cross the road? Why did the elephant do this or what? He remembered that very happy time as a family that we spent together.
Well, you have a question. Actually, this is a comment from Everly Heath. Was so enthralled with your story, nearly forgot to get out of bed to have my water before sunrise.
Oh,
She must be located in a place near the sunrise line. I fondly remember taking the Featherstones to Victoria Falls, the Featherstones of Victoria Falls when they came to visit us in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. Everly Heath.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I'm sorry you missed your drink of water.
And then Paul, she almost missed it. She almost missed it. I think she's probably got her water safely before the sun.
Oh, great.
Started her fast for her. And Paul asks this question: do you have any memories about Keith Ransom Keeler from Mother Dunn?
No, I don't.
Oh.
No, I'm sorry.
I have a question. Another question for you that has occurred to me, and this is again kind of a delicate one, maybe. Can you tell us the reaction when people heard that the Guardian had passed?
Oh, yes. I know, for one, my father and my mother were devastated because 1 month prior to this, Shoghi Effendi had appointed my father as Hand of the Cause. And he was coming to terms with that responsibility. And how could he measure up? And what did he now have to change in his life in order to meet those those qualities that Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha talked about? And then all of a sudden, Shoghi Effendi passes away. And you know, the believers at that time, they had a love affair with Shoghi Effendi. He spurred them on. You know, when you go back and read the early messages of the 10-year crusade, he so lovingly spurred the communities on to achieve and congratulate them on their efforts and spurred them on to do greater heights of service. And they certainly were. And then all of a sudden, for him to be gone, it was devastating. Baha'i communities around the world, I'm sure, just fell apart when they heard that news. And of course, Recollections, oh my goodness. However she got through those early days, just monumental. And then just in the November of that year, all the hands of the cause come together in the Holy Land to see if beloved Shoghi Effendi had left a will and testament. And 4 of the hands were appointed to go to his room to see if they could find anything like a will and testament. And they came back empty-handed. So they then had to sit down and consult. No will and testament? What does this mean? They had to go back to the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha and study it. What did Abdu'l-Baha say now? And then slowly they came to terms, and they knew that Shoghi Effendi had given the 10-year crusade. He had, in the last message, he'd called the hands of the cause the
Chief stewards.
The chief stewards, that's the one I was looking for. The chief stewards of the embryonic world order. And you know what they did? They looked up the dictionary to get the full meaning of chief steward. And they realized that the chief steward, when the captain of the ship is not available for one reason or another, the chief steward takes over. And so these chief stewards realized they now had to take over. And they had to steer the Baha'i world to the end of the 10-year crusade, to fill those goals which Shoghi Effendi had given all the national spiritual assemblies and all the countries, and then to prepare for the election of the Universal House of Justice. And that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did. It was a mighty task. Yeah.
Yep. Sue Emmel says that she wonders whether each hand of the cause was endowed with at least one special virtue for the edification of humanity. And if that is the case, what would you say were the outstanding virtues of Father and Mother Dunn?
Oh, self-sacrifice, number one. Remember what Mother Dunn said to Shoghi Effendi? I'm not good enough. I don't feel educated enough. She wasn't an educated woman. She was a very simple, came from a very poor background, a broken family background, you know. And then she lost her husband at a very early age. She was just 18 or 19. And she had a baby and lost her husband. It must have really knocked her confidence. And then she had to give up her baby because she couldn't take care of him. And so her brother took care of her baby. She never wanted to talk about that. She was heartbroken. And you know, it was my father who eventually found him, made contact with him, and invited him to come to Australia to meet Mother, which he did. He did a couple of times. And then it was in 1957 he passed away, and then his wife, his dear wife Louise, came and nursed Mother. That must have pleased her so much, because she never really knew her son.
Yeah.
Why did she end up in a mental institution? She had a nervous breakdown. She'd given up her child. She never wanted to talk about it. My father, when he was doing that tape on her, he tried to ask her. She wouldn't go there. They were sad years, very sad years for her. So suffering, you know. You look at many of the hands, they suffered. And it didn't come easily to them. They had to learn how to be a Baha'i.
Yeah.
They had to learn how to be detached from all things. And you know, in the end, they didn't care about material possessions. You read about the life of Dr. Mahaja. Absolutely incredible. All he had was his suitcase. And all he had in his suitcase was a change of clothes, and the rest was his Baha'i books. Yeah. And whenever the friends gave him a gift, he would go and give it away. He was not attached to material possessions. He left this world with nothing. And his dear wife and daughter, well, they sacrificed. These things didn't come without sacrifice. And it was not only them that sacrificed, their families, their wives in particular, sacrificed. And their children sacrificed. But also came the blessings. You know, my father didn't want to stay at home in a rocking chair as he got older. He would come home and he would collapse because physically he was getting older and his energy was running out and he had 2 heart attacks. But he told the family, I'm not sitting in my rocking chair. And so he would plan for his next assignment. He said, if I go, I will go with my boots on. And in fact, at one time when the family were all together, we teased him and said, I suppose when you die, you're going to go in a place like Timbuktu, which is, you know, like a tiny little place in the middle of Africa somewhere. And we'll have to find out how to get there. And so we laughed.
He did his best.
He did his best. He didn't go in Timbuktu. He went in Kathmandu.
Kathmandu.
It's always a family joke. He went in Kathmandu in Nepal. And we had to find our way there. Yes. So he went with his,
you talk about the sacrifices
like
and
many of the
blessings.
hands did. Yes.
Yeah, indeed. Well, you talk about the sacrifices and the blessings, and it is very clear that you have received many blessings from your sacrifices as part of this family of the Featherstones and of one of the beneficiaries of Mother Dunn's care and love as well. And we are infinitely grateful for your contributions to this series and to this. I think the inspiration of the Hands of the Cause gets transmitted on people this way. And I hope that the ripples will continue to spread outward as more people are inspired and arise and inspire others. You've inspired me immensely. You've made me think a lot about the example of the Guardian tonight and the example of these hands, some of whom I know of or have even met, but not much. And I regret not having had more of a chance to meet them. So I don't know what else to say other than thank you. It's really been an amazing evening, amazing session, and we're really grateful. I suppose we should come back to my computer screen now, and I'll mention the upcoming web talks that we're going to have soon. We have, of course, on March 25th, Robert Weinberg is going to talk about Mark Tobey, the famous abstract painter who was a Baha'i, and his art, and the influence that he's had on art is being recognized more and more. But I understand there's a marvelous new book out about Toby that I'm sure he'll mention. And then Valerie Phillips will talk about the special place of America in Baha'i authoritative texts on April 8th. Gregory Dahl wants to reflect about the 1st of March 2017 message of the Universal House of Justice as it relates to economics and economic life. This is really quite a remarkable statement by the House, which talks a lot about it. I try to remember the details, but I think I better not try to elaborate at this point. And then Ben Schul, who's a remarkable young PhD in philosophy, will be talking about ways of studying religion and looking at religion, including the so-called secularization theory that everyone used to believe in, that now people don't believe in so much. And so we'll have a philosophical presentation on May 6th. This shows you the range of topics the Wilmot Institute likes to cover. And then, of course, we have various upcoming courses. I've left this the same. The Baha'i Institutions course is still open as of, I think, for a few more hours for registrations. Healthcare and Social Action, Charters of the Faith just started today. And we have a course on the Baha'i Faith and the Arts, and the Some Answered Questions course coming up later this month. So that concludes our broadcast for today. Again, we want to thank everybody for participating, particularly Mariette and her poignant memories and her marvelous presentation of these very, very inspiring, remarkable stories of Baha'is. And I'm sure we will remember them all for quite a long time. Thank you, everybody, and have a good weekend.